What happens when one of the most controversial royals in modern history sits down with television's most unforgiving political commentator? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle steps into Bill Maher's studio, thinking she can control the narrative, only to discover that this host plays by nobody's rules but his own. The explosive confrontation that erupted last night has everyone talking, and by the end of this story, you'll understand why the Duchess of Sussex stormed off set in what insiders are calling the most dramatic guest exit in late-night television history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Hollywood royalty meets political comedy's most brutal truth-teller. The tension was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the real time with Bill Maher's set. Dressed in an immaculate cream-colored blazer that screamed calculated perfection, she carried herself with the practiced poise of someone accustomed to cameras but clearly underestimating the host she was about to face. Maher, notorious for his no-holds-barred approach to celebrity interviews, had been sharpening his wit all week for this encounter. Sources backstage revealed that production staff could sense something brewing. This wasn't going to be another softball celebrity chat. As Meghan settled into the guest chair, her media-trained smile faltered slightly when Maher's opening wasn't the warm welcome she'd clearly expected. Instead of pleasantries, Maher dove straight into the deep end with his signature sardonic grin. "So, Meghan, let's talk about your latest project, reinventing yourself as America's wronged princess. How's that working out for you?" The studio audience shifted uncomfortably as Meghan's composure flickered for just a moment before she regained her media-polished demeanor. "Bill, I think that's a rather reductive way to frame someone's authentic journey toward finding their voice," Meghan responded, her tone carrying that particular mix of wounded dignity and barely concealed irritation that had become her trademark in difficult interviews. She leaned forward slightly, a calculated move designed to appear engaged while subtly asserting dominance in the conversation. Maher wasn't buying it. "Authentic journey? Come on. You married into the most famous family on earth, got the fairy tale wedding that cost taxpayers millions, and then when you didn't like the job description, you took your ball and went home to California to lecture Americans about privilege. That's not a journey. That's a marketing strategy." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's carefully constructed facade began showing hairline cracks as her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I think you're mischaracterizing what was actually a very difficult period where we faced unprecedented levels of—" "Oh, here we go," Maher interrupted with a dismissive wave. "Unprecedented levels of what? Media attention? You do realize you voluntarily married into a family whose entire existence is based on media attention, right? That's literally their job description. They cut ribbons, wave at crowds, and pose for pictures. What exactly did you think you were signing up for?" Meghan's media training kicked in as she attempted to redirect the conversation toward familiar talking points about mental health and media responsibility, but Maher was relentless. "You know what I find fascinating about your whole narrative? You present yourself as this victim of institutional racism and royal protocols, but conveniently leave out the part where you were elevated from a cable TV actress to international royalty overnight. Most people would call that winning the lottery." "That's an incredibly privileged perspective, Bill," Meghan shot back, her voice carrying a sharp edge that cut through her usual measured tone. "You're essentially saying that I should have been grateful for racism because it came with a title. That's exactly the kind of thinking that perpetuates these systems of oppression." The host leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the shift in dynamics. "Racism? Let's be specific here. You're talking about tabloid criticism and palace protocol. Meanwhile, there are people facing actual systemic racism who don't have the luxury of moving to a Montecito mansion and signing Netflix deals worth hundreds of millions. Your version of oppression comes with a pretty lucrative exit strategy." Meghan's composure was visibly fraying at the edges. Her hands, previously folded demurely in her lap, were now gripping the armrests of her chair. "You're trivializing something that nearly cost me my mental health, Bill. The constant attacks, the isolation, the complete lack of support from an institution that was supposed to protect me. That's not privilege, that's psychological warfare." "Psychological warfare?" Maher's eyebrows shot up as he turned to address the audience. "Folks, I've interviewed war correspondents who faced actual psychological warfare. They didn't get million-dollar book deals out of it. Turning back. To Meghan, his tone sharpened. You had a choice every single day. You could have quietly done your royal duties, supported charities, and lived a life of unimaginable privilege. Instead, you chose to wage a public relations war against the institution that made you famous. The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something far more intense than typical late-night television banter. Meghan's breathing had become slightly more pronounced, and her carefully applied makeup couldn't quite hide the flush of anger creeping up her neck. That institution, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously low register, systematically undermined me from day one. They fed stories to the press, refused to defend me against false narratives, and when I tried to address legitimate concerns about how I was being treated, I was told to smile and bear it. That's not privilege, Bill, that's gaslighting on a global scale. Maher sensed blood in the water and pressed his advantage. So your solution was to go on Oprah and air the family's dirty laundry to 50 million viewers? To make vague accusations about racism without naming names or providing specifics? That's not seeking justice. That's revenge dressed up as activism. The accusation hit its mark. Meghan's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. Revenge, she repeated, her voice rising in pitch and volume. I shared my truth about what it was like to be the only person of color in that family, to be treated as an outsider despite doing everything they asked of me. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should examine why hearing about racism makes you so defensive. Don't, Maher said, his own voice hardening. Try to make this about me being uncomfortable with discussions of racism. I've been talking about racial issues on television longer than you've been famous. What makes me uncomfortable is watching someone weaponize serious social issues to settle personal scores. The exchange had crossed a line, and everyone in the studio could feel it. What started as typical Maher provocation had evolved into something much more personal and vicious. Meghan was no longer the composed Duchess. She was a woman whose carefully constructed public persona was being systematically dismantled on live television. Personal scores. Meghan's laugh was sharp and humorless. Bill, the only person keeping score here is you. You've spent the last 10 minutes trying to diminish my experience because it doesn't fit your narrative about what oppression should look like. But here's what you don't understand. When you're in that family, when you're under that level of scrutiny, when every single thing you do is twisted and weaponized against you, silence isn't golden. Silence is complicity. The confrontation was reaching a fever pitch, and neither participant seemed willing to back down. The tension in the room was suffocating as America's most controversial duchess faced off against late-night television's most ruthless interrogator. But this was only the beginning of what would become the most explosive celebrity meltdown in recent television history. Maher sensed he had struck a nerve and decided to twist the knife deeper. Complicity? That's rich coming from someone who was complicit in every single privilege that royal title afforded you until it became inconvenient. You lived in palaces, had staff waiting on you hand and foot, wore tiaras worth more than most, people's houses, and suddenly you're the victim? His voice dripped with sarcasm as he gestured dramatically. Tell me, during all those months of alleged suffering, did you ever consider returning the wedding gifts? The designer wardrobe? The multi-million-dollar renovations to Frogmore Cottage that British taxpayers funded? Meghan's eyes flashed dangerously, and for a moment, the mask of royal dignity slipped completely. How dare you reduce my experience to material possessions? You think this is about money? About jewelry? This is about a young woman who was systematically destroyed by an institution that promised to protect her but instead fed her to the wolves. Young woman, Maher scoffed. You were 36 years old, a working actress, and a college graduate. You weren't some naive teenager who stumbled into this situation. You dated the prince for 2 years before getting engaged. You had plenty of time to understand what you were signing up for. The audience could feel the temperature in the room rising with each exchange. Meghan's carefully modulated voice was becoming increasingly strained, her American accent growing more pronounced as her anger mounted. You know what, Bill? This is exactly what I'm talking about. This victim blaming, this constant need to find ways to make it my fault. I was gaslit for years, and now you're sitting here doing the exact same thing. Gaslit. Maher's voice rose incredulously. You went on international television and made serious allegations about racism and mental health neglect without providing a single concrete example. When pressed for details, you and Harry clammed up. That's not being gaslit. That's making accusations you can't back up. The studio's atmosphere had become electric with tension. Camera operators were adjusting their positions to capture every micro-expression, sensing they were witnessing television history in the making. Meghan's breathing was visibly shallow now, her composed exterior crumbling piece by piece. Can't. Back up. Meghan's voice was getting dangerously loud. You want specifics? Fine. I was told that my unborn child wouldn't receive security protection because of conversations about how dark his skin might be. I was denied mental health support when I was having suicidal thoughts because it wouldn't look good for the institution. Is that specific enough for you? Maher leaned forward, his expression suddenly serious. Those are incredibly serious allegations, Meghan. But here's my question. If those conversations actually happened, why haven't you named the people involved? Why make vague accusations that implicate an entire family when you could have named specific individuals? Because, Meghan said through gritted teeth, unlike some people, I still have some respect for family privacy. Even when that family threw me under the bus, I maintained some boundaries. Family privacy. Maher laughed harshly. You went on. Oprah, you've done Netflix documentaries. You've written books. You've maintained family privacy the way a tornado maintains structural integrity. You can't have it both ways. You can't profit from sharing your story while simultaneously claiming you're protecting family privacy. The attack was so pointed, so devastating in its accuracy, that Meghan visibly recoiled as if she'd been slapped. Her composure, already hanging by a thread, began to unravel completely. That's not what I'm doing. Everything I've shared has been about my own experience, my own truth. Your own truth. Maher's tone became increasingly cutting. There's no your truth and my truth. There's just truth. And the truth is that you've built an entire media empire on the foundation of being wronged by the royal family. Every interview, every project, every public appearance is about how you were mistreated. At what point does it stop being activism and start being a business model? The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Meghan's face had gone pale beneath her makeup, her hands now visibly shaking with rage. A business model? You think I put myself and my family through years of hell for money? You think I subjected my children to this scrutiny for profit? I think, Maher said slowly, deliberately, that you've discovered that being a professional victim pays better than being a working royal. And I think you've gotten very good at playing that role. The studio fell into complete silence. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath as Meghan processed what had just been said. Her face cycled through a range of emotions. Shock, hurt, fury, before settling on something far more dangerous. Cold, calculating anger. Professional victim, she repeated slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying more menace than if she'd screamed. Professional victim. You know what, Bill? You're right about one thing. I have gotten very good at something. I've gotten very good at recognizing bullies who hide behind the pretense of asking tough questions while actually just trying to tear people down for entertainment. Maher sensed he might have pushed too far, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. If calling out hypocrisy makes me a bully, then guilty is charged. But at least I'm honest about what I do. I don't wrap my career in the flag of social justice while cashing checks from Netflix. Honest. Meghan's laugh was bitter and sharp. You want to talk about honesty? Let's talk about how you've spent the last 15 minutes trying to discredit my experiences because they don't fit your narrow worldview. Let's talk about how you're so invested in tearing me down that you're willing to dismiss legitimate concerns about racism and mental health. I'm not dismissing racism or mental health issues, Maher shot back. I'm questioning whether your specific experiences qualify as the systematic oppression you claim they represent. There's a difference between being criticized by tabloids and facing actual discrimination. Actual discrimination. Meghan's voice was rising again, her control slipping further with each word. You want to know about actual discrimination? How about being the only person of color in that family and being told that your concerns about racist coverage didn't matter because it was just tabloid nonsense? How about watching your husband's white ex-girlfriends get treated like princesses while you're portrayed as a social climbing gold digger? The comparison was loaded with implications, and Maher pounced on it immediately. So this is about jealousy? About how Harry's ex-girlfriends were treated versus how you were treated? Because that sounds less like racism and more like good old-fashioned relationship drama. The suggestion that her experiences could be reduced to petty jealousy was the final straw. Meghan's careful facade shattered completely, revealing the raw anger that had been building throughout the interview. Jealousy? You think this is about jealousy? You really don't get it, do you? You sit there in your privileged bubble, making jokes about things you'll never experience, dismissing the reality of what it's like to be different in spaces that weren't built for you. Different. Maher's voice carried a dangerous edge now. You mean wealthy, famous, and married to a prince? Yeah, that's really different. Most people would kill for that kind of different. The sarcasm was the breaking point. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that cut through the tense silence. The sudden movement startled everyone. In the studio, and camera operators scrambled to adjust their angles to capture what was clearly about to be a dramatic moment. You know what, Bill? Meghan said, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. I came here thinking I could have an intelligent conversation about important issues. Instead, I've spent the last 20 minutes being attacked by someone who's more interested in scoring cheap points than understanding the real impact of systemic problems. Maher remained seated, but his posture had shifted to one of alert attention. He could sense that he was about to witness something unprecedented, and his instincts as a showman were warring with whatever remained of his human decency. If you can't handle tough questions about your own narrative, maybe you shouldn't be out here telling your story in the first place. The challenge was thrown down like a gauntlet, and the studio held its collective breath waiting to see how the Duchess would respond. But what happened next would shock everyone present and create a moment that would be replayed on social media for years to come. To Meghan's face transformed completely, the last vestiges of her media-trained composure evaporating like morning mist. What replaced it was something raw, unfiltered, and genuinely terrifying in its intensity. Handle tough questions, she repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. Bill, you haven't asked me a single tough question tonight. You've spent 30 minutes attacking me personally while hiding behind the pretense of journalism. She began pacing behind her chair like a caged animal, her hands gesticulating wildly as years of suppressed anger finally found their voice. You want to know what I can't handle? I can't handle sitting here listening to a privileged white man lecture me about what racism looks like. I can't handle being told that my experiences don't matter because I happen to have money now. And I definitely can't handle being called a professional victim by someone whose entire career is built on professional cynicism. Maher started to interrupt, but Meghan whirled on him with such fierce intensity that he actually leaned back in his chair. No, you've had your turn to talk. Now it's mine. Her voice was gaining strength and volume with each word. You sit there every week, making jokes about people's pain, reducing complex social issues to punchlines, and you think that makes you some kind of truth teller? You're not speaking truth to power, Bill. You are the power, and you're using it to punch down at people who dare to challenge systems you benefit from. The studio audience was completely silent, some looking uncomfortable, others leaning forward in fascination. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was clearly the most unhinged celebrity meltdown in recent television history. You want specifics about racism? Meghan continued, her voice now echoing through the studio. How about the fact that you've spent this entire interview trying to delegitimize my experiences without once considering that maybe, just maybe, I know what I lived through better than you do? How about the fact that your first instinct when hearing about discrimination is to find ways to discredit the person reporting it rather than examining the systems that allowed it to happen? Maher finally found his voice, but it lacked his usual confidence. Meghan, I think you're mischaracterizing what I mischaracterizing. Meghan's laugh was harsh and bitter. Oh, that's rich. You've spent the entire night mischaracterizing my life, my choices, and my motivations, but when I point out what you're actually doing, suddenly I'm the one twisting things. She moved closer to Maher's desk, her posture aggressive and confrontational. You know what your problem is, Bill? You're so used to being the smartest person in the room that you can't handle it when someone calls you out on your bullshit. You've built your brand on being the guy who asks the hard questions, but the truth is, You only ask hard questions to people you think you can intimidate. I'm not trying to intimidate anyone, Maher said, but his voice had lost its earlier bite. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about honest? Meghan's voice cracked with incredulous laughter. There's nothing honest about what you've done tonight. You came into this interview with a predetermined narrative about who I am and what my motivations are, and you've spent every minute since trying to force me into that box. That's not journalism. That's character assassination disguised as entertainment. The intensity in the room was suffocating. Production assistants were making frantic gestures from the sidelines, clearly wanting to cut to commercial, but no one dared interrupt what was unfolding. This was television gold, even if it was career suicide for everyone involved. Meghan's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper again. You want to know what professional victimhood looks like, Bill? It looks like a man who can't handle being challenged by a woman, so he tries to tear her down by questioning her credibility, her motivations, and her right to speak about her own experiences. It looks like someone who's so threatened by the idea that he might be wrong that he'd rather destroy someone else's reputation than examine his own biases. Maher's face had gone red. Whether from anger or embarrassment was impossible to tell. Now wait just a minute. No. Meghan slammed her hand down on his desk with such force that his coffee mug jumped. I've waited long enough. I've spent years being polite, being diplomatic, trying to take the high road while people like you tear me apart for sport. I'm done with that. I'm done pretending that your discomfort with my truth is somehow my problem to solve. She straightened up, suddenly appearing taller and more imposing than her actual height. You want to call me a professional victim? Fine. But let's be clear about what that makes you. It makes you a professional bully who's finally met someone who won't be bullied. It makes you a man so insecure in his own relevance that he has to tear down a woman who had the audacity to speak her truth and build something meaningful from her pain. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the cameras was audible. Meghan's breathing was heavy, her chest rising and falling rapidly as the adrenaline of confrontation coursed through her system. But she wasn't done yet. You know what the real tragedy is here, Bill? You had an opportunity tonight to have a meaningful conversation about racism, mental health, institutional power, and media responsibility. Instead, you chose to use your platform to try to humiliate someone who's already been through hell. That says everything about who you are as a person and nothing about who I am. She walked back to her chair, not to sit down, but to grab her purse with deliberate, controlled movements. I came here tonight hoping to find an interviewer who was interested in understanding different perspectives. Instead, I found a man so invested in his own narrative that he can't see past his own prejudices. Maher finally managed to find his voice, though it sounded strained and defensive. Meghan, if you'd just let me explain. Explain what? She cut him off with surgical precision. Explain how tearing me down for 30 minutes was actually some kind of public service? Explain how questioning my right to speak about racism is somehow fighting racism? Explain how dismissing my mental health struggles is actually promoting mental health awareness. She slung her purse over her shoulder with the decisive motion of someone who had made up their mind completely. There's nothing left to explain, Bill. You've shown everyone exactly who you are tonight. The question is whether they're paying attention. Turning toward the audience, Meghan addressed them directly for the first time. I want to thank all of you for witnessing this. Not because it was entertaining, but because it was educational. This is what gaslighting looks like in real time. This is what happens when someone in power feels threatened by someone telling their truth. Remember this moment the next time someone tries to tell you that racism is over or that speaking up about injustice is just playing the victim. She turned back to Maher one final time, her voice now calm, but carrying the weight of absolute finality. Bill, I hope someday you'll understand the difference between asking hard questions and being hard on people who don't deserve it. I hope you'll learn that being controversial isn't the same as being courageous. And I hope you'll realize that the legacy you're building with moments like this isn't the one you think it is. Without waiting for a response, Meghan Markle walked off the set with her head held high, her heels clicking against the studio floor in a rhythm that sounded like a drumbeat of defiance. The studio doors closed behind her with a soft thud that somehow felt like a thunderclap. Maher sat in stunned silence for several seconds, his usual quick wit completely abandoned. The audience remained frozen, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply sit in the uncomfortable silence that Meghan had left in her wake. When he finally spoke, His voice lacked all of its earlier confidence and bite. "Well," he said, attempting a weak smile that fooled no one, "that was unexpected, but it was too late. The damage was done, the moment captured, and the aftermath inevitable." In less than an hour, clips of the confrontation would be trending on every social media platform, with opinions split down predictable lines, but with one undeniable truth emerging from the chaos. America had just witnessed one of the most brutal and complete verbal destructions in television history, and for once, Bill Maher hadn't been the one doing the destroying.